Alexander Bradford spent the entire day lingering in front of a grand, centuries-old church, his presence blending into the background like a forgotten shadow. His tattered disguise consisted of a ragged t-shirt, its fabric barely holding together, and a pair of nearly shredded pants, their original color obscured by layers of dirt and powdered charcoal. His entire body was smeared with black body paint, making him appear as nothing more than a destitute soul, abandoned by the world. Yet, beneath the grime and the illusion of poverty, he was none other than Alexander Bradford, the eldest grandson of Mr. Desmond Bradford and the firstborn son of Chairman Ralph Bradford. Heir to one of the most powerful business empires, he stood at the precipice of inheriting the family legacy. But he had repeatedly refused the position, choosing instead to embark on a quest far more personal, to find a woman who would love him for who he truly was, not for the wealth attached to his name. Later that night, back in the comfort of his lavish estate, Alexander stepped into his private suite and began peeling away his disguise. The prosthetic mask came off first, followed by the grimy layers of clothing that had clung to him throughout the day. His right-hand man, Ben, stood by, arms crossed, his expression a mixture of dismay and disbelief. "Boss, why do you put yourself through this?" Ben asked, unable to hide his confusion. Alexander barely glanced at him as he ran a damp cloth over his face, wiping away the remnants of black paint. "How many times must I tell you, Ben? I need to meet a woman who will love me as I am, even if I look like this." Ben sighed, shaking his head. "Boss, why not just attend the events your grandmother keeps organizing? The blind dates. At least there you'll meet someone from a respectable, well-off family." Alexander scoffed, tossing the cloth aside. "You think I haven't tried that? Those women wear their smiles like masks, pretending to be dignified, but in the end, most of them only see me as a stepping stone to more wealth and influence. And then there are the others, the ones who seem sweet and innocent at first, but all they truly want is my fortune." Having rid himself of his disguise, Alexander made his way to the bathroom, longing to cleanse himself properly. As he stepped into the warm shower, his thoughts wandered back to his ongoing experiment. He had already tried posing as a beggar outside the grand church, hoping to witness kindness in its purest form. The previous week, he had ventured into the bustling markets and lively city parks, yet in all his time there, not a single person had truly acknowledged him. Was humanity really this indifferent? Even outside that famous church, where wealthy patrons arrived in luxury cars to offer their prayers, the largest sum he had received in an entire day was $1. It made him wonder, had generosity become extinct, or was kindness reserved only for those deemed worthy by society? That night, after refreshing himself, Alexander attended a grand gala at a prestigious five-star hotel, one of the many high-profile events his status demanded of him. As he strolled through the opulent lobby, his sharp eyes caught sight of an elegantly dressed woman, undeniably wealthy, but exuding an air of arrogance. She stood near the reception desk, her perfectly manicured fingers pointing accusingly at a hotel staff member. Alexander slowed his steps, his curiosity piqued. Pretending to be interested in one of the glossy brochures displayed for hotel guests, he edged closer to the scene. The woman's voice rang through the lobby, sharp and filled with contempt. "So what now? Can you afford to pay for my gown? It costs more than your pathetic life," she sneered, her tone dripping with condescension. Alexander expected the staff member to defend themselves, to at least offer an explanation. But instead, the employee bowed their head, silently accepting the barrage of insults without protest. That, more than the woman's cruelty, left him stunned. "What did you just say, madam? That your gown costs more than my life?" The woman's voice rang out with quiet defiance, her raised brows and piercing gaze fixed on the wealthy lady before her. The entire lobby seemed to still as she took a step forward, unfazed by the stunned expressions around her. "I'm sorry, but I won't stand for this any longer," she continued, her tone unwavering. "I may be a manager here at this hotel, but regardless of my position, you have no right to reduce a person's worth to mere fabric and embroidery. No one does. Sue me if you wish, have me fired if that satisfies you, but I assure you, no court would ever entertain such absurd reasoning." Her voice was firm, carrying a weight that silenced even the murmurs among onlookers. "All that happened was that a drink was spilled on your dress," she went on, her frustration evident, "and yet you didn't hesitate to humiliate our staff over it. As if that weren't enough, now you're trying to humiliate me too? Fine, if taking the blame for an accident will appease you, then so be it, but to say your dress is worth more than my life? That is utter nonsense. The wealthy woman faltered. She had expected compliance, not defiance. She had assumed that, like countless others, this hotel employee would bow, apologize, and rush to rectify the so-called offense. But instead, she was met with resistance. A resistance so firm that, for the first time, she found herself speechless. Fury surged within her, but without the words to retaliate, she did the only thing she could. Huffing in frustration, she spun on her heel and stormed off, her anger manifesting in a fit of whispered curses and frantic gestures. Moments later, her companions arrived, whispering among themselves as they gently steered her away, eager to avoid further embarrassment. From a distance, Alexander watched the scene unfold, his sharp eyes lingering on the hotel manager who had so boldly stood her ground. He wasn't sure why, but something about her tugged at his heart, a spark of admiration, curiosity, perhaps even intrigue. The moment the commotion settled, he turned to leave, but his feet hesitated, as if held back by an invisible force. Against his usual instincts, he found himself retracing his steps, making his way to the front desk. "Miss," he addressed the receptionist, keeping his voice casual, "may I ask who that woman was? The one who stood up to our rather difficult guest earlier?" The receptionist perked up, momentarily caught off guard by the inquiry. "Oh, you mean Miss Seraphina," she said with a small smile. That guest must have thought Miss Seraphina would be intimidated, but she clearly miscalculated. When pushed, Miss Seraphina pushes back, hard. But never without reason. She never uses her power to trample others. She's always fair. Alexander listened in silence, absorbing every word. Despite her strong personality, she's incredibly down to earth, the receptionist continued. And that's saying something, considering she comes from an influential family herself. She hates seeing lower-ranked staff being mistreated, and she always makes sure we feel safe under her leadership. To her, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, educated or not. She treats everyone with the same respect. Alexander nodded, filing away the information. "I see," he murmured. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't mention I asked about her." The receptionist tilted her head slightly in curiosity, but gave a polite nod. "Of course, sir." With that, Alexander turned away. But his mind was already working. He had her name now, Seraphina Bennett. And that was enough for him to dig deeper. Within hours, he had a full report on her background. Seraphina was the firstborn daughter of the late wife of Mr. Lorenzo Bennett, a respected businessman. After her mother's passing, her father had remarried a woman named Doreen, with whom he had 3 more daughters. Though she was part of the prestigious Bennett family, Seraphina had always been something of an outsider. She preferred independence over luxury, distancing herself from the family estate and only appearing at reunions out of duty rather than desire. Her family was well established, known for their wealth and reputation, though their influence paled in comparison to the Bradfords. Alexander's family had long dominated the business world, their investments spanning industries and continents, and for years his grandfather, father, and the company's shareholders had entrusted him with the future of the empire. Yet despite all his power, wealth, and resources, Alexander suddenly found himself captivated by a woman who, unlike so many before her, hadn't tried to impress or flatter him. Instead, she had stood her ground, unshaken by privilege or status. And for the first time in a long while, Alexander felt something stir within him. A challenge, an intrigue, a reason to look twice. But while Alexander had spent his days disguised as a beggar, searching for the woman he wished to spend his life with, he now believed he had finally found her. The only challenge left was making her fall for him without knowing who he truly was. He needed her to love him for who he appeared to be, not for his wealth or status. If she knew his real identity, everything would be meaningless. That morning, filled with anticipation, he once again donned his ragged disguise. Today, he had a plan. He positioned himself at the bus stop where Seraphina regularly waited for her ride to work, watching from a distance as she rushed toward the shelter just in time. He admired her from afar. Despite her privileged upbringing, she still chose to take public transportation, blending into the ordinary rhythm of daily life. That, in itself, fascinated him. But how could he get her to notice him? How could he extend their time together, even for just a few more moments? He thought about causing a small distraction, perhaps delaying the bus somehow. Then, with a silent plea, he even wished for rain, hoping the downpour would force her to stay longer. And as if the heavens had answered him, the sky darkened. The first raindrops fell, gradually turning into a heavy shower. For a brief second, he felt a flicker of triumph, but his moment of satisfaction was short-lived. As the rain poured harder, more people rushed into the bus stop for shelter, swallowing him into the crowd. Undeterred, he did what any beggar would do. He started asking for food. "Could anyone spare a little something to eat?" he murmured as he approached a woman standing nearby, his voice low and humble. The woman recoiled in disgust, her expression twisted in revulsion. "Ugh, get away from me! You stink and you're filthy! Why are they even letting beggars hang around here?" she snapped, pulling her handbag closer. "I'm not causing trouble, I'm just asking for a little food, maybe some spare change," Alexander said, keeping his tone polite. "I don't care! Get lost!" she barked again, her voice filled with disdain. Before Alexander could step away, another man approached. "What's going on here? Is this beggar bothering you?" Without waiting for an answer, the man turned to Alexander with hostility, his body tensed as if itching for a fight. Then, out of nowhere, he lashed out, trying to shove him aside. Another man joined in, and suddenly, it felt as though Alexander had become a target for their frustration. "What do you want, huh?" one of them shouted, shoving him roughly, making him stumble onto the wet pavement. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Alexander said, lifting his hands in surrender. "I'm just asking for a bit of food. Please, don't hurt me." But his plea only seemed to provoke them further. One of the men raised his foot, kicking Alexander in the ribs. Pain shot through his body, but he gritted his teeth and refused to retaliate. Then, just as another fist was about to strike him, another hand shot forward, gripping the attacker's wrist with surprising force. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" A sharp, commanding voice cut through the rain. "He's just a beggar. You're going to hurt him." The aggressor turned, his face twisting in irritation as he found himself face to face with a woman. Seraphina's grip on his wrist was firm, her posture unyielding. Though she was smaller than the man, she held back. There was fire in her eyes, a quiet but unmistakable authority. The man yanked his arm free with an annoyed snort. "Who are you, huh? His girlfriend?" he sneered. Seraphina didn't even flinch. "No, but that doesn't change the fact that what you're doing is wrong," she shot back, her voice unwavering. "If this guy robs you one day, don't come crying to us," the other man scoffed. Seraphina's gaze hardened. "Not every homeless person is a criminal, not every filthy person is evil, but you?" She took a step closer, her voice laced with quiet disdain. "You're the real problem, people like you who show no compassion at all." The men faltered, seemingly caught off guard by her sharp words. Then, unwilling to continue the confrontation, they grumbled under their breath before turning and walking away. Alexander, still seated on the wet pavement, looked up at Seraphina, his heart pounding. Not from fear or pain, but from something else entirely. In that moment, as the rain drummed against the pavement and the crowd whispered among themselves, he knew he had chosen well. The men finally walked away, grumbling under their breath. By then, the bus Seraphina had been waiting for had already come and gone. The rain continued to drizzle, the cold droplets glistening against her skin. She let out a quiet sigh, visibly annoyed at the inconvenience, but her irritation quickly faded as she turned her attention back to Alexander. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice laced with genuine concern. He nodded, though he couldn't help but feel a little amused, perhaps even slightly irked by the way she addressed him as Sir, as if he were some old man. "I'm Alexander," he said quickly, hoping to shift the dynamic. Seraphina simply nodded, then rummaged through her bag. "Sir, I'm sorry. It's not that I'm stingy, but I don't have any cash on me right now," she admitted. "All I have left is my bus fare, and I can't use it until I withdraw money from the ATM. But I do have my lunch and my umbrella." She pulled out a neatly wrapped sandwich and a small, floral pomaded umbrella. "Here," she said, extending the umbrella toward him. "Take it, but just so you know, I'm not giving it to you permanently." Her seriousness about the umbrella caught Alexander off guard. He had to bite back a laugh. She sounded like a child lending out a beloved toy. reluctant yet determined to get it back. "I'll just take the sandwich," he said softly, reaching for it, but Seraphina shook her head. "No, I'll lend you the umbrella too. You'll probably still be here later. Wait for me, okay? I get off at this stop around 7. She paused, studying him for a moment before adding, "Just stay here. I'll come back for my umbrella. Then I'll buy you another one and give you some money so you can get food." Alexander nearly laughed out loud. Her sincerity, her blunt honesty. It was almost too charming. Instead, he lowered his gaze, playing the part of a humble beggar, pretending to be shy and grateful. "Oh, you think I'm lying?" Seraphina teased, tilting her head playfully. Before he could answer, she spotted the next bus pulling up. "Come on, the bus is here," she called, flashing him a bright smile before climbing aboard. Alexander watched as the bus doors closed behind her, his eyes following the vehicle as it rolled down the street. He sat there for a long moment, leaning back against the bench, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pure, unfiltered joy. He had been right about her. From the moment she stepped in to defend him, he had sensed it, the kindness in her eyes, the way she had hesitated before stepping forward, as if debating whether to interfere. But she had. She had chosen to stand up for someone who, in her eyes, had nothing to offer in return. A slow smile stretched across his face as he tilted his head back, letting the last drops of rain fall onto his skin. He unwrapped the sandwich and took a bite, chewing slowly, savoring it. Not just the taste, but the fact that Seraphina had made it herself. He never imagined a woman like her existed outside of books, movies, or TV dramas. He had long believed all women were the same, materialistic, obsessed with wealth and status, drawn to him only because of his last name. His past relationships had been filled with empty laughter, designer shopping bags, and shallow conversations about money. But Seraphina was different. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. Sometimes it paid to be nosy. If he hadn't stayed to watch that argument in the hotel lobby, he never would have witnessed just how remarkable she was. And so, he waited. From morning until evening, he stayed there, sitting, lying down, getting up, stretching, watching the world pass by. For the first time in his life, waiting felt effortless. Because for once, he wasn't waiting for a business deal to close, or for an investor's approval, or for some corporate milestone. He was simply waiting for her. Of course, Alexander already knew her every move. He had discreetly assigned people to keep an eye on her, not to invade her privacy, but for her safety. The area she passed through every evening was notorious, lined with bars and clubs that attracted all kinds of drunks at night. That evening, he sat beneath an old oak tree on the side of the road, his face partially hidden beneath a battered, dust-covered cap. To anyone passing by, he looked like he had crawled straight out of the gutters. What no one knew, however, was that the cap was a vintage collector's item worth millions. He spotted Seraphina stepping off the bus, her eyes scanning the area as if searching for someone. Searching for him. A smirk tugged at his lips. She had actually kept her promise, but before he could bask in that small victory, two men, reeking of alcohol despite their polished suits, approached her. "Hey, miss," one of them slurred, stepping into her path. "We're a little lost. Think you could help us out?" Seraphina tensed. Something about them felt off. The way they leered at her, the slight sway in their stance, the two wide grins stretched across their faces. She took a step back, then another. The second man's grin dropped. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" he snapped. "Go after her." Seraphina turned and bolted, but they were faster than she expected. One of them caught up, yanking at her shoulder bag. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she spat, struggling to pull free. "I don't have any money to give you. You blow all your cash on booze and expect others to fix your mess? You probably do this all the time." "Oh yeah?" the man sneered. "We've got friends inside, but we're broke now, so be a good girl and help us out." Seraphina shoved him hard, but just as she broke free, two more men appeared, blocking her path. Alexander clenched his fists. He had planned to hold back, to let things play out just enough for him to swoop in dramatically. But as the situation escalated, he realized he had no time for game. Seraphina landed a solid punch on one of the men, but another retaliated, striking her across the face. Fury surged in Alexander's veins. That was it. He sprang from his spot and threw himself into the fight. The men barely acknowledged him at first, just a filthy beggar, not worth their time. But as he fought back, as he took blows meant for Seraphina and refused to stay down, their anger shifted toward him. "Pathetic little street rat," one of them spat, before driving a fist into Alexander's ribs. "You jerks!" Seraphina seethed, lunging forward, trying to defend him. "You're worse than animals!" The men surrounded them, ready to deliver more damage, until the distant wail of police sirens shattered the air. Their heads snapped toward the flashing lights of an approaching squad car. "Cops!" one of them hissed. Panic set in, and within seconds, the men scattered, vanishing into the darkness just as the police pulled up. "Are you both all right?" one of the officers asked as he stepped out of the car. Seraphina rushed to Alexander's side, kneeling beside him. He was bruised and bleeding, barely able to keep himself upright. "No, sir," she answered urgently. "He needs medical attention. Please, help me take him to the hospital." The officers hesitated for a moment. To them, Alexander was just a homeless man, someone society ignored. But something in Seraphina's voice, the sheer desperation in her plea, made them reconsider. "All right," one of them finally said. "Let's get him in." Seraphina didn't leave his side as they lifted him into the squad car. She stayed with him at the hospital, watching over him as the doctors treated his wounds and prescribed medication. And when they finally walked out together, the night air crisp around them, she was still there, supporting him every step of the way. Seraphina bought all the prescribed medicines and chose to walk with Alexander rather than take a cab. Her apartment building wasn't far, and the night air was cool, carrying the lingering scent of rain. Alexander trailed beside her, hands shoved into his pockets when his stomach betrayed him with a loud growl. He winced. Of all times, he had waited the entire day for Seraphina, completely forgetting to eat. Aside from that single sandwich she had given him earlier, Seraphina glanced at him, concern flickering across her face. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Because of me, you got hurt. Your life is already hard enough, and now you're in trouble because you tried to help me?" "Uh-huh." He straightened, trying to look unaffected. "No, I'm good. Don't worry about me." In truth, his disguise tonight wasn't as elaborate as usual. A bit of charcoal dust smeared across his face, some blackened teeth to appear broken and stained. That was all. Enough to pass as a beggar, but not too much to make him unrecognizable. As they reached the stairwell of her apartment building, he suddenly remembered something. The umbrella. He pulled it from under his jacket and held it out awkwardly. "Oh, right, your umbrella. Here." Seraphina took it, surprised. "Oh? You actually remembered?" He nodded. Her fingers traced the handle absent-mindedly before she smiled. "This is the only thing I have left from my mom." Alexander blinked. Her mother? He didn't know why, but the simple revelation made something shift inside him. He turned to leave, but before he could take another step, "Mister!" He froze. "Not sir. Mister." It was a small change, but it made his chest tighten with an odd kind of happiness. He turned to face her, waiting. Without hesitation, Seraphina grabbed his wrist and tugged him forward. "Come on!" Caught off guard, he let her pull him, barely keeping up as she suddenly broke into a run. "Wait, hey! Don't you have an elevator in this place?" he asked, breathless as she dragged him up the stairs. She laughed. "Nope. Just 5 floors of good old-fashioned exercise." 5 floors? His own mansion had 5 floors too, but with an elevator and even an escalator. Not endless flights of stairs like this. He wasn't used to running up them, especially in this disguise. By the time they reached her door, he was slightly out of breath, trying not to show it. Seraphina unlocked the door and glanced back at him. "Come inside. Are you sure?" he asked, stepping in hesitantly. "Of course. Sorry if it's a bit messy. I haven't had time to tidy up," she said, as if she were welcoming some esteemed guest rather than a stranger off the street. Alexander chuckled. "Why are you apologizing? I'm just a beggar. You're letting me stay here. Does it even matter what it looks like?" He stopped himself before adding more. "Don't have a home." The words almost slipped out, but he bit them back. Seraphina turned to him with a serious expression. "You keep saying just a beggar. That just part is belittling, she told him firmly before walking to the fridge. Alexander stared after her, momentarily speechless. She poured water into 2 glasses, handing him one while taking a sip from the other. And for the first time in a long while, Alexander found himself wondering, was she only kind to strangers, or was she seeing something in him he hadn't even seen in himself? Alexander stared at her, swallowing hard. His eyes briefly drifted downward, but he quickly looked away, not wanting to seem disrespectful. He refused to take advantage of her kindness, her innocence. She hadn't even hesitated to let him in, hadn't worried for a second that he might harm her. Then she spoke, snapping him from his thoughts. "Huh?" he mumbled, caught off guard. "Why aren't you drinking your water?" Seraphina asked, tilting her head. "Aren't you tired from climbing all those stairs? I know you're not used to it." Alexander blinked, surprised by her certainty. "Not really," he muttered before finally taking a sip. The water was cool and refreshing, but her next words made him pause. "But I wonder, why do malls or other establishments bar beggars from entering, confining them to the doors like that? It's sad." Seraphina sighed. He studied her for a moment before asking, "Is it only sad, or is it also disgusting for some people? Because honestly, more people are disgusted by beggars than they pity them. And if so many pity us, why do so few actually give anything?" She set her glass down, her expression thoughtful. "Yeah, you're right. It's not just disgust, it's judgment. People assume that if you're homeless, you must be some criminal. But I see it the other way around. The ones who look nice and well-dressed, they can have the worst intentions, and they're the ones who are never satisfied." Alexander stared at her, something shifting inside him. She wasn't naive, far from it. Despite coming from wealth, she had no illusions about the world. She chose not to indulge in excess, worked hard on her own terms, and never looked down on others. His admiration for her deepened. Seraphina suddenly stood and handed him a towel. "Go, take a shower or change. The bathroom's over there." No, that's okay." Alexander hesitated. "I'll just head out. Someone might see me here. You know how people are. They'll gossip and then they'll judge you. I don't want that to happen." She gave him a knowing look. "Don't worry. No one can hear us here. The walls are thick. And look at the weather. There's a storm tonight. You can stay. It's fine by me." She smiled slightly. "Besides, I'm pretty sure you're not planning anything bad." Alexander's throat tightened. The trust in her voice, it was something he wasn't used to. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded and took the towel. The shower felt like heaven. He took his time, scrubbing away the grime, the filth, the uncomfortable weight of his disguise. Pretending to be a beggar was harder than he'd ever imagined. Not just physically, but mentally. By the time he stepped out, his stomach growled loudly. He glanced toward the small dining table, where Seraphina was setting down a simple meal. The scent of warm food filled the air. "Come on, let's eat," she said with an apologetic smile. "Sorry, this is all I managed to cook. My fridge is almost empty. I was supposed to buy groceries earlier, but then, well, everything happened." Alexander sat down, watching her as she pulled out 2 plates. He had eaten in the most extravagant dining halls, attended feasts fit for royalty, but somehow at this tiny table, with this woman who had nothing extravagant to offer, he felt more at home than he ever had before. "It's fine. I'm just a beggar anyway, so there's no need to apologize," Alexander said. Seraphina's expression darkened. With an abrupt clatter, she slammed her fork onto the table, making him look up in surprise. "Stop adding just before everything," she scolded, one eyebrow raised. "That word lowers your self-esteem." She could be sharp about things that bothered her, but when she noticed him eating heartily, her irritation faded into a small, amused smile. After they finished the meal, Seraphina took the dishes to the sink. Alexander lingered by the window terrace, gazing out at the shimmering city lights. Moments later, she joined him. "Oh, by the way, I'm Seraphina Bennett," she said casually, leaning on the railing. "My dad's company building is right over there." She pointed out the window, where a towering skyscraper bore her father's name in glowing letters. Alexander simply nodded, his thoughts elsewhere. She had a life of privilege, yet she carried none of the arrogance that often came with it. She was kind but firm, gentle yet unyielding, and as much as he admired her, A part of him dreaded the day she would learn the truth about him. Would she hate him then? 6 months passed. Alexander continued his charade as a beggar, though now with less grime and cleaner, albeit still worn, clothes. After that night in her apartment, he and Seraphina had grown close. He always waited for her at the bus stop, walking with her part of the way home. And now he was ready to take the next step, to court her. On afternoon, Seraphina spotted him loitering near a hotel entrance. She approached, eyeing him curiously. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Alexander scratched the back of his head, feeling oddly self-conscious. In one hand, he held a crumpled plastic bag containing leftover bread. In the other, a separate bag with a sweet drink he had bought at Summit Park. "Ah, sorry, here." He thrust the drink and bread toward her. "It's not much." Seraphina blinked, then broke into a smile. "Oh, you didn't have to. Did you eat?" Before he could respond, she grabbed his wrist and pulled him toward a stone bench outside the hotel. They sat down together. "Hey, are you sure it's okay for you to sit here?" Alexander asked, glancing around. "Of course, I'm not fussy," she replied, waving off his concern. Then, narrowing her eyes at him, she asked again, "Did you eat yet?" He hesitated, and that was answer enough. She sighed. "Oh, go on, eat. I can share my lunch with you." She gestured toward her neatly packed meal. "You're always eating bread. Is that all you can afford in the places you roam around?" Her question was innocent, free of judgment. But instead of answering, Alexander smirked, a teasing glint in his eyes. "Why? Are you worried about me? Why? Are you going to stop me from begging?" Alexander teased. "Don't be silly. Why would I do that?" Seraphina laughed, shaking her head. She was easy to be around, unpretentious, warm, and full of life. Despite Alexander being in her eyes just a beggar, their friendship had flourished. He often waited outside the hotel, greeting her when she arrived and walking her partway home. But while Seraphina treated him kindly, others were less accepting. "Mum Seraphina, why are you befriending a beggar?" one of her co-workers asked one day, oblivious to the quiet snickers of others around them. Seraphina barely reacted, simply smiling at Alexander before turning back to the employee. "Why not? He's nice." The laughter in the background quickly died down, but Alexander caught the way they exchanged smirks when Seraphina wasn't looking. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, one of the hotel security guards stormed toward him. "Hey you, get out of here! Beggars aren't allowed inside," the guard barked. Alexander exhaled, keeping his voice calm. "I'm just waiting for someone. I won't cause trouble." But the guard wasn't interested in listening. He shoved Alexander roughly. "I said get out! You might scare the guests away," another guard sneered, stepping forward. "What are you doing?" Alexander asked, still hoping they'd come to their senses. Instead, the second guard reached for his holster, drawing his firearm. Before Alexander could react, Seraphina's voice cut through the tension. "Hey, what do you think you're doing? Why are you pointing a gun at him?" She stormed up to them, forcing the guard's hand down before he could fully raise his weapon. "Ma'am, he won't leave. He's making a scene," the first guard argued, his voice defensive. "Shut it! I saw exactly what happened," Seraphina snapped, her hands curled into fists at her sides. "Is it wrong for him to wait here, in the lobby, or even just by the door? I can't stand this kind of discrimination. Do they teach this somewhere? Because I'm seeing it way too often." She turned to Alexander, helping him to his feet. "From now on, I don't want to see anything like this again. There is no policy, no rule anywhere that bans people like him. Got it? Are we clear?" The guards exchanged uneasy glances, but one of them still tried to argue. "But ma'am, what about the hotel guests? They'll be uncomfortable seeing a beggar around, and if the higher-ups find out we let someone like that in here, we'll get in trouble. Is this beggar more important than our jobs?" Seraphina's lips curled into a smirk, but her eyes were sharp. "As far as I'm concerned, basic human decency is more important than any position. And if you think treating someone with kindness could cost you your job, then maybe you're in the wrong line of work. Tell me, if you can't even look down and acknowledge those beneath you, do you really think you deserve a promotion?" The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander watched her, his heart pounding, not because of the confrontation, but because of the woman standing in front of him. Fierce, fearless, and unwilling to bend to injustice. He had admired her before, now he was certain. He was falling in love with her. Seraphina took Alexander's arm and led him into one of the hotel's restaurants, guiding him to an empty table. She even pulled out the chair for him, completely unbothered by the hushed whispers around them. Alexander sat down, watching her with growing admiration. She wasn't just kind, she was fearless. She didn't care about the stares, the judgment, or the murmurs of disapproval. She genuinely cared about people, no matter their status. His chest tightened at the thought. She would make a good wife. But would she ever say yes if he asked her? The mere idea sent a wave of nervousness through him. His palms grew cold, his heart pounded. He wanted to ask her, right then and there. But what if she didn't see him that way? A waiter approached, and Seraphina ordered him a drink without hesitation. She already knew what he liked. After all, they had spent months together at her apartment, sharing meals, conversations, and laughter. What was he to her? Just a friend? Or something more? Before he could dwell on it further, a sudden hush fell over the restaurant. A group of people had stopped right in front of their table. Two women, about Seraphina's age, stood there, flanked by a few men. One of them clung to a man's arm possessively, her expression twisted with disdain as she eyed Alexander from head to toe. "Well, well, well. Here you are, sis," one of them drawled, her voice dripping with mockery before turning her gaze back to Seraphina. Seraphina barely spared her a glance. "Oh, why are you here? Didn't I already tell you I don't have time for that so-called dinner?" "But you have time for this beggar," the other woman snapped, her tone sharp and scornful. "You're actually on a date with him?" The men beside them exchanged smug glances, as if barely restraining their amusement. Alexander clenched his fists. He was used to being looked down on, but the way they spoke, like he was beneath them, like he wasn't even a person, made him want to wipe those arrogant smirks off their faces. "You have no right to question me," Seraphina shot back coldly, her patience wearing thin. "Because the person sitting in front of me right now is 100 times more decent to talk to than either of you. Or that manipulative mother of yours who keeps trying to auction me off to men she hand-picks." The tension crackled like a live wire. Seraphina abruptly stood up, grabbing Alexander's wrist. "Let's go," she muttered under her breath. But before they could take a step, one of the sisters sneered, her voice laced with superiority. "Sis, you're a manager at this hotel, yet you're always seen hanging around with a beggar. People have been complaining to Dad. That's why our mom is arranging a marriage for you, so you can finally have someone official in your life instead of wasting all your time on him." Alexander felt his blood run cold. So that was it. They didn't just look down on him, they wanted him gone. He turned to Seraphina, half expecting her to falter, to hesitate. But she didn't. Instead, she lifted her chin and narrowed her eyes, her grip on his wrist tightening. And at that moment, Alexander knew, no matter what they threw at her, Seraphina Bennett was never the type to back down. "Shut up. I've been living on my own sweat and tears for a long time now. I don't depend on any of you," Seraphina snapped, her patience finally breaking. Linda Bennett, the eldest child from their father's second marriage, folded her arms and smirked. "Oh, really? But what if you lose your job because of that beggar? Are you sure you'll survive by just being friends with him?" "Exactly, sis Seraphina," another sister chimed in, shaking her head in mock pity. "The hotel manager already reported to Dad. They don't like what you did. Defending a low-level employee by arguing with a VIP guest? And now, you're protecting a beggar from the guards. Don't you think you've gone too far?" Their scrutinizing, judgmental stares turned toward Alexander like daggers. Seraphina inhaled sharply, her fists clenching. "Would you all just leave?" But they weren't done. "Sis, are you a beggar's wife now?" one of them taunted. "Because the way you defend him, it sure seems like it's more than just friendship." The air felt heavy with tension. Seraphina turned to them, her jaw set, her eyes blazing. Then, without hesitation, she lifted her chin and declared, "Yes, I'm a beggar's wife. If that's what it takes to stop you from using me as a pawn for social influence, I'd rather marry him than be part of your games. And consider yourselves invited." Silence. For the first time, her sisters looked stunned. Before they could recover, Seraphina turned on her heel, grabbed Alexander's hand and walked briskly out of the hotel, not sparing them another glance. The city lights blurred as they walked down the main highway, her fingers still laced with his, firm and warm. Alexander smiled to himself, his heart pounding. This was it. This was the woman he wanted to bring to the altar, the woman he wanted to spend his life with. But just as he was savoring the moment, Seraphina suddenly stopped. She let go of his hand? "I'm sorry." Her voice trembled, and he turned to see tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't mean for all that to happen. I'm sorry. I hope you're not mad about what I said earlier. Sorry if I used you. Sorry if I hurt you." He looked away, swallowing hard, feeling the sting of emotions he couldn't quite put into words. What an incredible woman, he thought. Someone who could stand up to the world, yet still humble herself to apologize, even when she had done nothing wrong. "Why are you apologizing?" he asked softly. "Because I dragged you into a lie. I know it was bad manners. I shouldn't have pulled you into my messy life." She wiped at her tears hastily, as if embarrassed by them. "But if you don't want to marry me, it's okay. I won't force you." His heart stopped. For a moment, all he could do was stare at her. Then he exhaled, looking up at the night sky, as if thanking the heavens. Earlier, he had feared rejection, that if he confessed his feelings or even proposed, she might not want him. But now, she was the one standing before him, offering him everything. "Are you sure you want to marry me?" he finally asked, his voice steady but his heart pounding louder than ever. "Yes," Seraphina said firmly, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "I prefer you over any other guy." Alexander's breath hitched as she continued. "You've been staying in my apartment for a while, but you never took advantage of me. You've always been respectful, always kind. Even if things are tough, I know I can still have a decent life with you." She smiled wryly. "I've saved some money, so even if I lose my job, we'll manage." Then, with a teasing glint in her eyes, she added, "And anyway, what's wrong with rummaging through the trash if we have to? At least it helps clean up the surroundings." That thought made them both laugh. How far they might go just to be together. Seraphina truly believed he was a beggar. A week later, they married in secret. It was a simple ceremony, officiated by a judge Seraphina had connections with. A friend of the judge stood as their witness, sealing their union without the approval or even the knowledge of her family. She never expected, however, that the very same judge's friend would report the marriage to her father that night in the quiet warmth of her apartment. Their apartment. Alexander wrestled with the truth. He had wanted to tell her before they married, but now that they had exchanged vows, the weight of his secret grew heavier. Would she hate him once she discovered who he truly was? He had to tell her, but no matter how many times he tried to find the right words, they stuck in his throat. The bathroom door clicked open and he turned, only to freeze at the sight before him. Seraphina stepped out, freshly showered, her damp hair cascading over her shoulders. But that wasn't what stunned him. She wasn't wearing her usual simple clothes. She was wearing a delicate, lacy nightgown. His throat went dry. "Why are you wearing that?" he blurted, eyes widening. Seraphina's jaw dropped, one eyebrow arched. "Huh? What do you want me to wear? Pajamas? Or that duster Mrs. Mary sells downstairs?" She shot back, crossing her arms. Alexander swallowed hard. "Are you mad?" he asked cautiously, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. "You're so annoying," she huffed. "You're ruining the moment." She spun around, arms still folded, her irritation evident. "Do you have any idea how many times I imagined this? I wanted our first night to be special. We're not like those couples who can afford a fancy honeymoon overseas, so I wanted us, to be happy tonight. And here you are, acting shocked over what I'm wearing." Alexander stared hard. Even with her back to him, frustration radiating from her every movement, he couldn't believe it. She loved him. She chose him. Not once did she make him feel inferior. Not once did she look down on him. And yet, she still didn't know who he really was. Would she still look at him the same way once she found out? Overcome with emotion, Alexander felt tears slip down his cheeks. Without thinking, he wrapped his arms around Seraphina from behind, his silent sobs shaking him. His tears fell onto her shoulder, making her turn in surprise. "What's wrong?" she asked softly, cupping his face in her hands and tilting it toward her. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, she sighed and added, Okay, I'm sorry for raising my voice." She pouted dramatically. "Fine, if you don't like me being aggressive, I'll change into something else. Tomorrow night, I'll tone it down. But for now, this is all I've got." She huffed and turned away as if truly offended. Alexander burst out laughing, boisterous, heartfelt laughter that shook away his lingering tears. He caught her wrist, spun her back around, and seized her lips in a deep kiss. That night they shared laughter, love, and tenderness, wrapped in each other's warmth. And Alexander, he felt like the luckiest beggar in the world. This incredible woman, with her kindness and fierce heart, had chosen him. She never judged him for his social status, never hesitated to stand beside him. He vowed right then and there that no matter what, he would put her on a pedestal for the rest of his life. "You know, love," he murmured as they lay together, his fingers tracing circles on her back. "You're better than all those women who think they're superior." Seraphina smiled, her arms tightening around him. "And I'm the happiest beggar's wife there is." He looked into her eyes, searching. "Are you sure you don't regret marrying someone as poor as me?" She shook her head without hesitation. "Not even a little bit. No matter what you look like or where you come from, love and respect matter more. Maybe people would call this crazy if you were a bad person, but I know you're good. I trust you." Her words sent a pang of guilt through him. What would she say if she knew the truth? The secret loomed over him like a storm cloud, but he pushed it aside. Tonight was about them. The next morning they were still asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, when, bang! The apartment door burst open. Both of them jolted awake as figures stormed inside. Seraphina bolted upright. "Who are you?" she shouted. Alexander, still half asleep, echoed, "Who are you?" They clung to each other as a commanding voice rang through the room. "And you? Who the hell are you, lonely man, that you're hugging my daughter like that?" Alexander's stomach dropped. Seraphina's eyes went wide. "Dad?" There, standing in the doorway, was Mr. Lawrence Bennett, her father. "Why are you here?" Seraphina demanded, scrambling to pull the sheets tighter around her. "To take you away from this beggar," her father thundered. "You had the nerve to marry my daughter just like that?" Seraphina squared her shoulders. "Dad, we're already married, and we've been together as husband and wife." "Enough!" Mr. Bennett bellowed, signaling to the men behind him. Before either of them could react, his guards stormed forward. The guards rushed forward, aiming their guns directly at Alexander. "No!" Seraphina screamed, throwing herself between them. "I'll go with you, just don't hurt my husband." Mr. Bennett didn't even spare Alexander a glance as he grabbed Seraphina's wrist and yanked her away. "Seraphina!" Alexander shouted, struggling against the guards restraining him. "Wait for me, I'll come for you." He fought to break free, but Mr. Bennett's men shoved him back before hauling Seraphina into the sleek black car. The engine roared to life. "No," she sobbed, her face pressed against the window as the car sped away. Alexander clenched his fists, his heart pounding in his chest. They had no idea who they were dealing with. He yanked out his phone and called his men, his voice low and sharp. "Follow them. Don't lose sight of that car." Unbeknownst to Seraphina, Alexander had stationed his own people nearby, prepared for something exactly like this. Bennett dragged Seraphina into his mansion, his grip bruising her wrist. She fought against him, but his strength overwhelmed her. Tears streamed down her face. "Dad, please, don't hurt Alexander. He can't fight you. He's just a simple man. Please, I'm begging you." Her father didn't respond. He simply strode through the grand halls, past the towering marble columns, past the servants who dared not look her in the eye. Waiting for them in the grand parlor was Doreen Bennett, her stepmother, seated with a glass of wine in hand, and Seraphina's half-sisters, who smirked as they watched the scene unfold. Beside them sat their boyfriends, lounging in the opulent chairs like they owned the place. "You will marry Nathaniel Bradford," her father declared. Seraphina stiffened. "Bradford?" Her mind reeled. That was Alexander's last name? "No," she shouted, shaking her head violently. "I refuse. My husband's last name is Bradford. I will never marry anyone else." The room went silent for a beat. Then, with a sharp crack, Dorna's palm struck her cheek. Seraphina barely flinched. The sting was nothing compared to the fury boiling in her veins. "Why did you marry a beggar?" Dorna spat. Seraphina lifted her chin, eyes blazing. "So what if he's poor? He is a good man, unlike all of you who only care about money and power," her half-sisters scoffed. "That's disgusting," one of them sneered. "Why would you choose that over a wealthy man?" Seraphina's lip curled. Because he's a better person than the scumbag sitting next to you, who, by the way, I see with different women every other night at my hotel." Her sister turned red. "Dad, Mom, tell her to stop talking." But Seraphina wasn't done. She turned to her father, her voice cold and unyielding. "You can call me a beggar's wife all you want," she said, "but I will never be a pawn in your power games." Seraphina was locked in her room for days, the walls closing in on her as her father and stepmother schemed to force her into another marriage. But the whispers spread like wildfire. Seraphina Bennett was already a beggar's wife. Every wealthy suitor they approached recoiled. Even Nathaniel Bradford, their supposed golden ticket, backed out without hesitation. "Now what, Mom?" one of her half-sisters grumbled. "No rich man wants to marry Sis Seraphina now that they know she married a beggar." "I hate this," squeaked the youngest, Rena Bennett. "I am not taking her place. I'm not marrying some old guy just because she ruined everything." "Shut up, all of you," Rena snapped, massaging her temples. "My headache is getting worse. If your father finds out about the massive amount of money I embezzled from the company, we're the ones who'll be ruined. And if it comes to that, don't think I won't sell one of you off instead." Seraphina let out a low, bitter chuckle. "Is there really no one left for you to fool?" She turned her back on them. "Good. At least now I won't have to marry anyone else." Doreen's eyes narrowed. "Was it you? Did you spread the rumor that you married a beggar?" "No," Seraphina said, her voice thick with mock gratitude. "But to whoever did, thank you. You're saving me from this hell." One of her sisters scoffed. "Where is that beggar now, anyway? After just one night, he vanished, along with your dignity." Seraphina clenched her fists. "Do you even realize what you did? If you hadn't meddled and dragged me away, I would still be happy with him." Her voice cracked. "He has no means to fight you, and you know it. Even if he wanted to find me, where would he even start?" She looked at their cold, indifferent faces and felt the weight of their cruelty pressing down on her. "You're all terrible," she choked out before storming away, her sobs echoing down the hall. The next morning, her world shattered even further. She was scheduled to marry someone else. Tomorrow, Seraphina sat at the long dining table, staring at the elaborate spread before her. Glistening roasted meats, imported cheeses, fine wines, the kind of decadent feast they indulged in while treating their household staff like dirt. Just like her stepmother, just like all of them. She exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the table. "Who did you trick this time?" she asked flatly. No one answered, but she already knew. "He's Alexander Bradford," Doreen declared smugly. "Supposedly the best among all the CEOs set to inherit the chairman position, or so they say. He turned it down for now because he's busy with something else." Seraphina's stomach churned at the broad grin on her stepmother's face. Her father looked equally pleased, as if they had just struck gold. Greed and wickedness really are contagious. She clenched her fists. "Dad, couldn't you at least remember the kindness my mother showed you? Is there nothing left of that in you at all?" Her father's expression darkened. "Seraphina, you're going too far. And what about you?" She fired back, voice shaking. "What kind of father sells his own daughter to some rich stranger?" Pain and rage twisted inside her. She never wanted to talk to her father this way, never wanted to see him as the monster he had become. Mr. Bennett slammed his utensils onto the plate. "Do you really want to stay with that beggar?" he bellowed. She flinched. "Just get out of my sight," he roared. The words sliced through her like a blade. Tears blurred her vision as she stumbled out of the dining room, her heart breaking all over again. She had nowhere to run, no choice but to face the fate they had forced upon her. She felt like she was walking toward her execution. And now, the day had come. In hours, they would deliver her to the altar like a sacrificial lamb. The venue had been changed from a church to a luxury beach resort, an extravagant spectacle meant to impress the wealthy elite. The Bennett clan was already there, whispering, murmuring about how she had supposedly married a beggar. She heard every cruel remark, even from inside the mansion. Then, the sound of whirring blades filled the air. A private helicopter descended onto the estate, gleaming under the sun. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even they hadn't realized how extravagant this wedding would be. All courtesy of the powerful groom who, despite her so-called ruined reputation, still wanted to marry her. Seraphina stepped onto the helicopter, dread pooling in her stomach. She loved Alexander, even if he was a beggar, but her father had left her no choice. He and Doreen had threatened to kill him if she refused to marry the wealthy Bradford, and as the helicopter soared toward the lavish beach resort, her heart shattered even more. This was the wedding she had dreamed of. A beach wedding, the very same dream she once shared with Alexander, but now it was nothing more than a cruel twist of fate, except now it was a different Alexander fulfilling that dream. Not that it mattered anymore. There was no excitement, no joy, just a hollow ache in her chest. Everything was happening so fast. The guests poured in, relatives, co-workers from her hotel, and a sea of strangers she assumed must be the groom's family. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the red carpet, but then she froze. Her gaze locked onto a group of men seated together in one row. Something about them felt off. She squinted, retracing her steps, making the entire crowd murmur in confusion. "I know you guys," she murmured. "Weren't you the men who did those bad things?" A flicker of unease passed through the 5 men's faces. Maybe we just look like them," one muttered. "This is the first time we've seen you." Lies. But before she could press further, she forced herself to move forward, walking stiffly until she reached the officiant. And then, her heart stopped, her eyes widened in shock. The judge. It was the same judge who had secretly officiated her marriage to Alexander. Frowning, she studied his face, but he avoided her gaze. Her stomach twisted. What is going on? She turned her head from side to side, clutching the bouquet in her hands. At least her gown was comfortable. And the bouquet, sunflowers and white daisies, her favorites. A cruel detail. "Is my bride ready?" A deep voice rang through the air. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The groom had arrived, dressed in ragged, beggar-like clothes. Murmurs exploded in the room as heads whipped toward the man standing at the entrance. Seraphina's heart pounded wildly. Her father's face contorted in rage. He stood to confront him, but Alexander's own bodyguards held him back. "What is the meaning of this, beggar? Are you here to stop my daughter's wedding?" Mr. Bennett roared. Seraphina didn't think. "Dad, don't!" she cried, rushing toward Alexander. "I love him! I'll go with him!" She threw herself into his arms, clinging to him. "Seraphina, my love," he whispered against her hair, holding her as if he'd never let go again. "Get out of here!" her stepmother shrieked, but another voice rang out, strong, authoritative. "What right do you have to throw out the groom?" A woman rose to her feet. Dressed in elegance, power radiating from every inch of her presence, Seraphina's breath hitched. "Alexander's mother. He's my son, the man who's marrying Seraphina," she declared. The entire room fell into stunned silence. Everyone on the Bennett side was stunned, but no one more than Seraphina's stepmother. Seraphina herself felt weak at the knees, her wide eyes locked onto Alexander. Past the grime, past the ragged clothes, straight to the man beneath it all. Unbelievably handsome. The blackened teeth were gone. The only thing that remained was the disguise of dirt and tattered clothing. Her breath hitched. "Is this all true?" she whispered. Alexander's expression softened. "I'm so sorry I never told you." Seraphina raised a hand, not to touch him, but to stop him. "Don't follow me." Her voice was quiet but firm. Then she turned and ran, lifting the hem of her gown as she dashed out of the grand wedding tent. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. The Bennett family stood frozen, blindsided by the shocking revelation. Alexander staggered back, his face a mask of panic. Where was she going? "Go after her," her father suddenly bellowed, snapping out of his shock. And when Seraphina had said, "Don't follow me," she had meant the opposite. "Go follow her," her father ordered again. Alexander didn't hesitate. He sprinted after her. Seraphina ran until her legs ached, the roar of the waves guiding her to the shore. She collapsed forward, hands braced on her knees, struggling for breath. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the salty breeze. She felt like a fairy tale character, one whose magic had just shattered. "Seraphina!" Alexander's voice carried over the wind, raw with desperation. "I'm so sorry!" He slowed as he neared, watching her tremble on the sand. "Are you going to end your life because I lied to you? Can't you forgive me?" She straightened, wiping her face. "Why would I kill myself over this?" she shot back, her voice shaking. "Let's just do the wedding right." Alexander stepped closer, heart pounding. But before he could speak, she demanded, "Why did you deceive me? You know I never wanted to marry a wealthy man. I don't want to end up like my mom, lonely and trapped in a life where money means more than love. I watched her suffer until the day she died. Her sobs wrecked him. But I'm not like your dad, he swore. We'll have a different life. One filled with happiness, love, and adventure. I promise you, Seraphina, every hour, every day I will cherish you. Please forgive me. Let's start over. She crossed her arms, studying him through teary eyes. What if I still want to be a beggar's wife? She challenged. Would you leave your wealth behind for me? Alexander didn't flinch. I would. His voice was steady, unwavering. I did it for months just to be with you. I can do it again. Alexander took a deep breath. Again? But could you live knowing thousands of people might lose their jobs if I abandoned my role? His voice was steady, yet there was an unspoken plea in his eyes. I'm a CEO, soon to be chairman. If I walk away, Nathaniel Bradford will take over. And if that happens, all the employees who depend on me could lose their livelihoods. His gaze locked onto hers. Could you live with that? If you say yes, then let's run away and stay beggars for the rest of our lives. Seraphina narrowed her eyes. Are you apologizing or guilt-tripping me? Alexander burst into booming laughter, the rich sound echoing against the crashing waves. Seraphina hated how good he looked when he laughed. How was she supposed to stay mad when he did that? But he had her. He knew she couldn't ignore the fate of so many innocent employees who relied on him. You were about to marry someone else just to protect me from your father, Alexander mused. So, I decided to show myself, he smirked. I was the one who spread the rumor that you were a beggar's wife, Seraphina gasped. That was you? I was afraid some other man might claim you first, he admitted. Then, in one swift move, he pulled her into a tight embrace. Before she could respond, his lips claimed hers. The world around them faded. I missed you so much, my love, Alexander murmured against her lips. Seraphina trembled in his arms. Where were you? She choked out, her tears spilling freely. I waited for you. I thought you'd never come for me. Her voice broke, revealing the pain she had tried so hard to suppress. Alexander cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. I would have torn down the world to find you, he vowed. I will never leave you again. A sudden wave of cheers and applause erupted around them. Seraphina turned to see the wedding guests gathered at the shore, their faces lit with joy. Evan, her father, looked stunned. The ceremony went on, but this time it was on their terms. Everything was made clear. Who Alexander truly was, why he had done what he did, and how Seraphina had never once been ashamed to be called a beggar's wife. Even her father and siblings, humiliated by their actions, had no choice but to apologize. Her stepmother, however, stood in mortified silence. Alexander's parents, having watched everything unfold, were deeply moved. Why would you go through all this? His mother asked. Because I wanted to find the one woman who would love me for me, not for my name or my wealth, Alexander explained, his eyes never leaving Seraphina's. And she had. Seraphina had married him wholeheartedly, without hesitation, without conditions. She had chosen him. And Alexander vowed that for the rest of their lives he would make sure she never again knew the fear and loneliness that had haunted her childhood. 2 days later, they left for Hawaii, this time as husband and wife, together forever. Seraphina had once mentioned wanting to explore every inch of Hawaii, so they made the most of their time there, turning it into an unofficial second honeymoon. But eventually reality called them back. 6 months passed after they returned to the mainland, settling into their new life. When Seraphina learned she was pregnant, she resigned from her job. Instead, she devoted herself entirely to Alexander, following him everywhere like his shadow. My love, aren't you going to rest? He asked one afternoon, glancing at her over his paperwork. Why should I? She huffed, sprawled on the couch in his office. I'm not tired. I like it here. She perked up suddenly, pointing across the room. Oh, honey, I want to add an extension over there. I'll have a small kitchen built so I can cook instead of ordering takeout all the time. She pouted, waiting for his reaction. Alexander chuckled, leaning back in his chair. My love, are you planning to live here in the office? First a kitchen, then maybe a bedroom? He teased. Seraphina's eyes narrowed. She stood abruptly, marched over to his desk and slammed her palm on the surface. "What's your problem?" Alexander asked, startled. "Don't act so clueless," she fumed. "Are you getting bored of having me around your office?" "What?" He blinked, completely baffled. "What are you talking about, my love? You said you'd never make me live a sad life, waiting at home for you every day," she cried, eyes burning with emotion. "You promised we'd be together every hour of every day. Am I a burden to you now? Am I in your way?" She shrugged off his arm before he could pull her close and stormed out of the office. Then, moments later, she stormed right back in. "And don't follow me," she snapped. Alexander just chuckled, grabbing his jacket, and hers, before heading after her. By the time he reached the elevator, she was still sulking. Her arms were crossed, her lips in a full pout, and she was pointedly ignoring him. Oh, mood swings. Ever since they found out about the pregnancy, her fussiness had been on another level. "My love, the car's right here," he called out playfully. She rolled her eyes. "Whatever, come on honey, I'll drive," he said, carefully pulling the car around as he leaned over to open the passenger door for her. He braced himself. Would she get in willingly, or find another reason to fight? One thing was certain, life with pregnant Seraphina was never dull. Seraphina hesitated for a moment before finally getting into the car, still refusing to say a word. Alexander chuckled to himself. Silent treatment. Without a word, he started the engine and drove toward Summit Park, the place where many homeless families sought refuge. It was also where they had spent countless days together back when he was still pretending to be a beggar. When they arrived, Seraphina looked around in surprise. "Why'd you bring me here?" she asked, eyeing the familiar surroundings. "No reason. I just remembered how often we came here before," he said lightly. Her eyes widened in realization. "Oh, that's right. I remember now. You used to buy me a sweet drink and a piece of cheap bread." They exchanged a knowing look, then burst into laughter. Her lingering frustration melted away as Alexander gently pulled her to lean against his shoulder. "My love, I love you," he whispered. "I love you too," she murmured back, but then, without warning, Seraphina shot up from her seat and yelled at the top of her lungs, "I am a beggar's wife!" Alexander's eyes widened. "Seraphina? Did you all know? My husband used to be a beggar," she shouted, her voice echoing through the park. "Yes, that's him. He used to be a beggar, but now it's our turn to help you." Without hesitation, she pulled out a wad of cash and began handing out bills to every homeless person in sight, those who had no shelter, no comfort, and no one to rely on. Alexander watched her in awe, the way she beamed, the way she gave so selflessly. It reminded him why he had fallen for her in the first place. By the time they finished, they walked back to the car, their hearts full. Alexander grinned. "My love, your heart is so kind, and you're still so proud of being a beggar's wife." Seraphina turned to him with a teasing smile. "Why not? I'm not ashamed of once having been married to a man who only pretended to be a beggar." She sighed happily, then added, "I hope our kids take after you, with a heart as good as yours. Someone who never steps on others and always stands up for what's right." Alexander wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Thank you," he whispered. Seraphina smiled, resting her head against his chest. "I love you, my beggar." But before he could respond, he noticed her breathing had slowed. She had dozed off, curled against him, the brave woman who had constantly rescued him, the bold one who had captured his heart. Alexander gazed at her, overwhelmed with gratitude. Once he had believed he would never find someone who would love him for who he truly was, despite his circumstances. But now he had her. And he would spend the rest of his life making sure she was happy. Pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, he closed his eyes and joined her in a blissful sleep. This story reminds us that true love isn't built on wealth or status, but on genuine connection, trust, and resilience. Seraphina and Alexander's journey proves that love transcends material possessions, and the strongest relationships are those rooted in sincerity. It also highlights the importance of kindness and standing up for what's right, even in the face of adversity. Seraphina never let society's judgment define her, and Alexander valued integrity over deception, proving that real strength lies in staying true to oneself. In the end, happiness isn't about riches or power, It's about finding someone who loves you for who you are. And when love is pure, it has the power to change lives, heal wounds, and inspire others. Let this story be a reminder. No matter where you come from or what obstacles you face, love, kindness, and determination will always lead you to where you truly belong. I hope you enjoyed this unforgettable journey. If it touched your heart, let me know in the comments below.